The air cuts like glass. The silence hums with cold. The wind moves like a memory, sharp, invisible, restless. Somewhere in that white emptiness, survival whispers a single question: where's the water? The wind howls through the empty plains. Snow devours the horizon. Now, imagine this. It's the dead of winter in the northern plains. You're wrapped in layers, huddled inside a makeshift cabin that creaks with every gust of icy wind. Outside, snow keeps falling, thick, endless, merciless. It buries the trails, muffles the world, erases any sense of time or direction. Your firewood pile is shrinking. You haven't eaten in 12 hours. But none of that compares to the dry sting in your throat. The river nearby has frozen over. Melting snow is an option, sure, but it saps body heat, drop by drop. You try to ration, but your lips are splitting. Your breath grows shallow, and with each hour that passes, dehydration creeps closer. Not loud, but deadly. You feel your heartbeat echo in your temples. Slow, heavy, desperate for moisture. Every second stretches longer than thirst itself. You thought water was everywhere. But in the wild, water is not always what it seems. Finding it is hard. Making it safe is harder. It's not just a test of strength. It's a test of knowledge, of how much you truly understand the world around you. Now, here's a question. What did people do before filters, tablets, or plastic canteens? Let's step back. Early European settlers. Many of them died next to water, streams, ponds, rivers. They drank what looked clean, but wasn't. They ignored nature's silent warnings: parasites, bacteria, toxic runoff. These things didn't care about your intentions. But here's the twist. Those who had the tools often perished, while those with only wisdom survived. Think about this for a moment. Knowledge was their compass, not chance. Simple, precise, perfected by time. Native American tribes across snow-covered forests, desert basins, and foggy coastlines managed to survive, even thrive, using techniques that were passed down, not purchased. No one taught them with manuals. They learned from the land itself. Their survival wasn't a lucky guess. It was deliberate. It was engineered. It was brilliant. What's remarkable is how sophisticated those methods were. Tribes didn't just find water, they cultivated knowledge around it. They knew the sounds that birds made when water was near. They understood which trees stored moisture in their trunks. Some collected dew on stretched animal hides. Others dug small holes beside dry creek beds to reach underground seeps, clean, filtered by sand and stone. And the strange truth is, many of these techniques could outperform modern tools in the long run. Why? Because they worked with the land, not against it. They didn't carry their environment, they understood it. Every shelter, every journey, every drop followed principles of balance and observation, lessons born from patient engineering, not chance. But it gets deeper. Water, for these tribes, wasn't just a resource. It was a relationship. It wasn't consumed carelessly. It was treated with ceremony. To the Zuni people, water from a seasonal stream wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. Among the Dene, water spirits were consulted before any major migration. And in the Pacific Northwest, salmon runs were tied directly to river purity, both biological and ethical. And while today we treat water like an infinite commodity, indigenous communities saw it differently. In their world, water was not owned, it was honored. Every drop reflected the balance between sky and soil, reminding them that to harm one was to wound the other. At dawn, they watched the rivers glow, as if the earth was speaking in light. They believed the sky breathed through rivers, and that every ripple carried a piece of the world's memory. Even more surprising is how relevant this wisdom feels today, because here's the harsh reality. We're running out of clean water. Aquifers are dropping, rivers are shrinking, and despite all our tech, many still go thirsty. Meanwhile, the people we often overlooked, the ones we called primitive, already had answers, already knew where to look, how to gather, and how to store water for months without contamination. While modern systems break down during crises, their methods endure. So let me ask you something personal. If the taps stopped running tomorrow, what would you do? Would you know how to track a spring? Could you purify water with only what the earth gives? They could. And that's not legend. That's science, wrapped in culture, sharpened by necessity, and sustained through generations. Because water isn't just about hydration, it's about connection to land, to community, to culture. And in the wild, water isn't just life, it's legacy. But legacy only matters when it's understood. And that's where our journey begins. Because in the oldest stories of water lie the first blueprints of survival itself. And maybe, in remembering them, we remember ourselves. Water is everywhere, but only for those who know where and how to look. To most of us, survival means collecting puddles or boiling stream water. But to many Native American tribes, water wasn't just found, it was managed, shaped, and harnessed using principles of natural science long before those ideas had names. Here's where it gets fascinating. They didn't invent technology as we define it, but they engineered ecosystems. Imagine a Lakota Tipi during the height of winter. At first glance, it's just a conical shelter made of buffalo hides and wooden poles. But step inside and you enter a microclimate, a system designed to retain warmth, manage airflow, and protect life. The liner inside the teepee creates a double-wall structure, allowing warm air to rise while cold air sinks and escapes. Above, two flaps can be adjusted based on wind direction, letting smoke exit without losing heat. That's fluid dynamics in real time. And now, imagine snow melting in a small iron pot above the fire, placed on stones heated hours earlier. The stones hold warmth longer, reducing wood use and keeping the water warm without boiling dry. Around it, children gather snow and pack it against hides that line the base of the teepee, melting gradually, dripping into troughs carved into antlers or shallow bark cups. This wasn't just resourcefulness, it was climate-specific engineering. They didn't force nature, they partnered with it. Further south, among the Hopi and Pueblo peoples, survival meant outsmarting the desert. With rainfall averaging less than 10 inches per year, they observed the behavior of plants, insects, and even shifting shadows to locate hidden water. Moisture trapped under stone, inside cactus flesh, or condensed at dawn. They learned that air cooled quickly in dry climates, allowing condensation to form inside tightly woven baskets lined with leaves. Overnight, this would collect enough to drink by morning. They didn't call it condensation science, but that's exactly what it was. Even the food they prepared was part of their water logic. Pemmican, a dried mix of meat, fat, and berries, not only preserved nutrients but required no water to rehydrate. It gave energy without pulling moisture from the body. Other foods like pawpaw cakes, mayhaw jelly, or persimmon pudding used seasonal fruits high in water content and vitamin C, reducing the need to drink as much in winter and avoiding scurvy. Think about that. These weren't just meals, they were hydration strategies. But perhaps most brilliant of all was how they used landscape as infrastructure. In the Pacific Northwest, tribes placed hollow logs near waterfalls to catch spray, then carved notches to redirect the flow into basins, cool, clean, and shielded from animals. In the southeast, Choctaw families dug narrow wells near tree roots, not deep, but strategically placed where root systems filtered groundwater naturally. These weren't random holes. They were natural filtration devices, tested over generations. Some groups even used charcoal from their own fires, crushed into fine powder, then packed into hollowed reeds or clay funnels to filter impurities. Today, we call it activated carbon filtration. They did it with no electricity, no factory, just understanding. And that's the moment we start to see the truth. What looked like tradition was applied science. What sounded like stories were engineering manuals in disguise. They learned that water travels in patterns, that wind changes with time of day, that heat escapes unless contained, and that sometimes the safest water isn't in a stream, but in the air, in the plants, in the rhythm of nature itself. Even more astonishing, they stored water without plastic, without spoilage. Clay pots, unglazed, allowed tiny amounts of moisture to evaporate through their walls, cooling the rest. In hotter months, some buried them in shaded pits, insulating with leaves and moss. The result: cool, clean water, days, even weeks later. So here's the aha moment. They didn't just survive. They designed survival into daily life. And they did it through careful observation, trial, error, retesting, recording, remembering. That's not just wisdom. That's scientific process, disguised in ritual, but real in result. So the next time someone tells you traditional knowledge isn't science, ask them this. Can your water bottle teach you about air pressure? Can your GPS track condensation at dawn? Can your purifier teach you to read the shadows of rocks? Because they could. And in doing so, they proved something profound. Nature doesn't need to be conquered. It needs to be understood. Survival isn't about brute force. It's about elegant solutions built from necessity. In the vast tapestry of Native American water survival, the tools weren't flashy. They weren't metallic or mass-produced. But they were genius, each one born from centuries of refinement, carved not in steel, but in memory. Let's start where survival begins: shelter. The tipi, often romanticized in art, isn't just a home. It's a functional masterpiece of thermodynamics. Its conical shape sheds wind and snow, while its inner liner creates a two-layer barrier that traps warm air close to the ground. But there's more. The top of the tipi has smoke flaps, adjustable like vents, allowing warm air and smoke to escape while drawing in fresh oxygen. Combined with a fire pit at the center and insulated flooring made of dry grass, animal hides, and birch mats, the result is a breathable, warm environment where water can be melted, stored, and protected, even in blizzards. Inside this microclimate, stone warming systems were often used. Heated rocks placed near water containers would slowly warm melting snow or ice without boiling it dry, reducing fuel use and keeping hydration ongoing. Some families built shallow depression basins in the tipi floor lined with bark or hide to catch meltwater as snow packed in bowls dripped through cloth or moss. These were slow filter systems, as effective as modern passive filtration. Now shift southward into desert territory. Among the Hopi, Navajo, and Pueblo peoples, the scarcity of water inspired decentralized collection systems. Instead of building wells, they relied on fog nets made from tightly woven fibers stretched across wooden frames to capture morning condensation. Others placed smooth stones in open clearings overnight, using their surface temperature to condense moisture, which was then gathered with soft plant leaves and funneled into clay jars. And about those jars, let's pause here. Clay water storage is perhaps one of the most overlooked marvels of ancient engineering. Unglazed, they allowed minimal evaporation, which cooled the water inside, a natural refrigeration system. Some tribes painted the exterior with white ash to reflect sunlight. Others half buried the jars in pits surrounded by moss and cedar bark for insulation. When sealed with beeswax or resin, they kept water clean for weeks, even in heat. Meanwhile, in the wetlands of the southeast, Choctaw and Creek families collected water using cypress wood troughs. Hollowed naturally or carved with fire and stone, these troughs were placed near natural springs or seep zones. The wood's antimicrobial oils helped inhibit algae and bacterial growth. Water was often pre-filtered through woven baskets lined with moss and crushed charcoal, a rudimentary yet impressively effective carbon filtration system. And speaking of carbon, many tribes discovered the cleansing power of charcoal through observation. After forest fires, water near charred areas ran clearer, smelled fresher. From this came the practice of crushing coals from cooking fires into fine powder, then packing them into porous bark funnels or folded hides to cleanse stream water. It wasn't magic. It was activated carbon before the term existed. Let's not forget mobility. For nomadic groups like the Comanche and Apache, Portability was everything. They used water bladders made from buffalo stomachs or deer hides, cleaned, smoked, and sealed with sinew. These were lightweight, flexible, and could carry quarts of water slung over a horse's flank or traveler's shoulder. Even better, some tribes added crushed berries like cranberry or juniper to the water inside. Antimicrobial agents that helped preserve freshness. Not only were these additives practical, but they added nutrients and flavor, essential in long travels across arid landscapes. When it came to food, every recipe was designed with hydration in mind. Pemmican, the famous survival food, was compact, dry, but incredibly efficient. Made from dried meat, rendered fat, and berries, it didn't require water to cook, and it retained moisture internally thanks to the fat barrier. It nourished without dehydrating. Other foods like pawpaw cakes and mayhaw jelly were water-rich when fresh, but dried into slow-release hydration sources, like edible sponges. When chewed slowly, they rehydrated in the mouth, conserving internal water use. And in colder regions, tribes used ice lensing, a method of gathering translucent glacier ice over snow. Glacial ice, aged and compressed, contained less air and more clean water. Melted over firestones, it gave the cleanest, safest hydration, a trick still used in polar expeditions today. All of these tools, stones, hides, bark, moss, clay, bone, snow, berries, weren't just items. They were extensions of landscape. They turned nature into infrastructure. They turned scarcity into system. But perhaps the most powerful tool of all wasn't physical. It was timing. Many tribes practiced seasonal harvesting, foraging certain water-bearing plants like water vine, cactus pads, or cloudberries at peak moisture. They read the land's hydration cycle as if it spoke a language. When birds changed songs, when insects vanished, when shadows shortened. They didn't just carry tools, they were the tools. Each mind carried generations of data, stored not in servers, but in stories, ceremonies, and silent observation. So next time you hold a plastic bottle or tap a faucet, ask yourself, what would you build if you had none of that? Could your shelter catch condensation? Could your pot cool without electricity? Because they could. And what they built still echoes, in smoke flaps, in moss filters, in every drop saved by memory. Knowledge means little without action. What set Native American tribes apart wasn't just what they knew, it was how they moved with that knowledge. Water wasn't just studied, it was woven into daily life. Every gesture, every migration, every habit reflected a deep choreography with the land. Let's begin with the ritual of setting camp. For nomadic tribes like the Lakota, Blackfoot, or Comanche, the Tipi wasn't a structure, it was a system. Setting one up took 30 to 60 minutes with a skilled group. First, the tripod poles were raised and tied with sinew. Then came the cover, buffalo hides, sewn with bone needles and soaked in resin for weatherproofing. But within that construction came a strategy of water management. The ground was cleared of snow or debris. Dry grass and pine needles were layered first, creating insulation from the cold earth. Over that came buffalo hides, forming a soft, breathable barrier that retained heat and protected stored water from freezing. Water containers, whether hide bladders or clay pots, were placed near the fire but not directly in heat. Heated stones were rotated nearby to keep a constant, low warmth for melting snow or thawing stored ice. Fire placement was central, not just for cooking, but for atmospheric control. The smoke flaps above were adjusted every few hours based on wind and humidity. If the flaps were too wide, heat escaped, too narrow, and smoke stayed. Children were taught from age 5 to read the direction of smoke threads, how they curled, how fast they rose, because that told them about pressure, temperature, and whether they needed more fuel, more air, or better flap positioning. Now consider how water was gathered and transported. In forested regions, women and elders walked short distances at dawn to collect dew with woven cloth or animal skin. In arid zones, water was cached in pre-selected seasonal sites. known springs, seep pits, shaded rock basins. These were mapped by memory, passed from elder to child with songs, stories, and markers made from stacked stones or carved tree bark. When traveling, they carried rolled hide water bladders, tightly bound and balanced across the back or slung across pack animals. Some were carried like sashes across the chest, warmed by body heat to prevent freezing. For long hauls, they used double-layered containers, inner bladders wrapped in bark or cooled cloth to regulate temperature. Now here's a fascinating behavioral insight. They rarely drank during movement. Instead, they practiced microhydration, small sips during stops, chewing water-rich roots like cactus pads or pawpaw. This reduced stress on the body and avoided overdrinking, which could cause cramps or loss of salt balance. They also used snow internally, not just by melting, but by tucking it into the crook of the elbow or against the chest inside cloth, letting it melt gradually to cool the core without shocking the system. At night, water was stored under layers of hides or buried in moss-lined pits. These insulated caches could keep water liquid overnight, even in sub-zero cold. During rain, every surface became a collector. Tipi covers were shaped to drain into buckets. Bark funnels were propped under leaf drips. Even hanging hides were used as rain catchers, repurposed temporarily into giant flexible gutters. Let's look at seasonal behavior. In spring, when snow melted, the first waters were rarely used. They were often filled with debris, animal waste, or sediment. Instead, tribes waited until the second melt, clearer and safer. During summer, when creeks ran low, they moved closer to highland springs. Altitudinal migration was common, following not game but water. In autumn, they preserved not just food but hydration. Berries like cloudberries and cranberries were dried into sheets, soaked in honey or fat, and stored for later. These were chewed slowly during winter for slow-release water and nutrients. Roots like sweet flag or wild onions were also dried and boiled with meltwater to create rehydrating teas. And what about foraging? Water wasn't always visible, but clues were. Certain birds, like finches or waxwings, were known to stay near water sources. If they appeared at dawn, it meant dew nearby. If they appeared mid-afternoon, it meant standing water. Ants, too, led to moisture. Their trails often pointed to hidden seeps, under stones or near tree roots. Some tribes used digging sticks, long, fire-hardened poles, to gently probe sand or mud for wetness. Once found, they scooped small holes, lined them with moss or bark, and let the groundwater seep in slowly, collecting over hours. In all this, there's a theme: respect through rhythm. They didn't strip the land of water, they moved with it, adjusted to it, shared it. Even during drought, rules were followed. Elders drank last. Travelers took only what they could replace. Children were taught to feel moisture in soil before stepping. It wasn't superstition, it was resource protection, embedded in behavior. And through it all, one truth echoed: survival wasn't a moment, it was a habit. 100 micro decisions: where to dig, how to store, when to drink, how to listen to smoke, formed a system of intelligent practice. No single trick could save you, but thousands of learned behaviors could. So if modern survival is about gear, ancient survival was about attention. And attention, when passed on, becomes legacy, not in books, but in movements, rituals, and touch. Because in a world where every drop counts, how you live is how you save. When survival becomes a system, it gives more than safety. It gives strength. The water practices of Native American tribes weren't just effective in the moment. They yielded powerful, long-term benefits, the kind that sustained not just life, but community, health, and harmony with the earth. Let's start with the practical. A teepee, compared to a wooden cabin, used less than 1/10 the amount of firewood during winter. That's not a metaphor, it's a measurable fact. While cabins demanded constant heat to warm, thick, unbreathable walls, teepees were ventilated heat pockets, maintaining warmth with far less fuel, and that meant less time chopping trees, less exhaustion, less exposure to the cold. More energy saved, more life preserved. Now think about water. Because they knew when and where to collect it, many tribes could go days or even weeks without relying on large moving sources. They gathered rain, dew, plant moisture, and snowmelt in ways that required no infrastructure, only observation and timing. This decentralized access meant they were less vulnerable to droughts or blocked rivers. They weren't waiting on weather. They were working with it. And because they filtered water with moss, charcoal, stone, and clay, not chemicals, they avoided diseases that later wiped out entire settler groups. Sickness like dysentery or scurvy rarely struck their camps. Why? Because their foods were rich in vitamin C, their tools clean, their water rotated and protected. Even more important, their water strategies kept nature intact. By collecting dew and fog or using shaded springs rather than damming rivers, they avoided disturbing ecosystems. Their clay jars, bark funnels, hide bladders, all biodegradable. No plastics, no pollutants, no permanent damage. Their impact was soft, but their presence strong. And then came the human benefits, ones we forget to measure. Shared water rituals created stronger families. Children who helped gather snow or adjust smoke flaps weren't just learning chores, they were learning survival through participation. The teepee wasn't just warm, it was a classroom. And every drop of water was a lesson in responsibility, care, and rhythm. This created a sense of communal intelligence. Elders passed down water routes and foraging cycles. Mothers taught recipes that hydrated and healed. Fathers showed how to watch birds, track shadows, and time their steps with the land. In doing so, they built a generation of thinkers, not just survivors. And let's not forget the emotional reward. There's a peace in knowing your water is clean, in knowing that you can find it, protect it, and share it. That peace is power, especially in a world where modern systems can fail, pipes can freeze, and store shelves can empty in hours. Their knowledge wasn't insurance, it was confidence, built on practice, not panic. But perhaps the greatest benefit of all was something harder to define: a worldview. They saw water not as a resource, but as a relative. Something to be listened to, not extracted. Something that held memory, presence, and identity. To walk gently around a spring, to kneel before a stream. These weren't acts of weakness. They were acts of belonging. And in that belonging came balance. Because when you believe that harming water is harming yourself, you behave differently. You use less. You share more. You teach better. So what do we gain by remembering these practices? We gain not just skills, but perspective. We begin to ask better questions. Not how much water do I need, but how much can I live with without harming the source? We gain resilience that doesn't rely on tools, but on attention. We gain systems that heal, not harm. And we gain something rare, a way of living where every drop carries meaning. Because when water is sacred, survival becomes something deeper, something shared, something wise. We've come a long way, from snowfields to desert springs, from teepee fires to moss-lined funnels. But behind every tool, every technique, and every decision, there's one deeper thread: culture. Because in the world of Native American survival, water was never just liquid. It was story, spirit, memory. And now, more than ever, that memory matters. Across hundreds of tribes, from the Inuit in the Arctic to the Seminole in the Everglades, water wasn't treated as a resource, a word rooted in control. It was a relationship, one that demanded listening, observing, and giving as much as it took. When elders told stories of rivers moving like serpents or of clouds gifting their breath to the earth, they weren't just telling myths. They were encoding environmental science into culture, embedding hydrology into history, teaching children to care by making water alive in the imagination. That's what made their systems sustainable, not just because they worked, but because they meant something. And that's where we, today, often go wrong. We build pipelines without asking what runs dry. We irrigate fields without wondering what goes salty. We treat water like a guarantee, not a guest. And when the wells dry, we blame the weather, not the way we live. But perhaps the most urgent lesson from native water knowledge isn't how to survive. It's how to relate to water, to land, to each other. Because water, in their view, didn't just flow between mountains. It flowed between people. You drank what the sky gave. You shared what the roots filtered. You celebrated rain, mourned drought, and honored the hands that taught you to listen for drips in the quiet. Water wasn't a private right, it was a public rhythm. And maybe that's what we've forgotten. But we can remember. We can learn to see rivers not as obstacles, but as teachers. We can treat fog not as background, but as an invitation. We can collect rain not just in tanks, but in stories. Stories that teach responsibility, restraint, and reverence. And in doing so, we don't just build resilience. We rebuild connection. Because here's the truth no filter can replicate. Water heals. When we let it teach us. It teaches patience, like waiting for the second snow melt. It teaches attention, like watching smoke threads rise. It teaches humility, like kneeling beside a spring that fed your ancestors. These are not soft ideas. They are strong ones, the kind that survive winters, outlast droughts, and pass through generations not as gadgets, but as guiding principles. And here's the call now, to stop seeing water as something we manage, and start seeing it as someone we partner with. To revisit old wisdom, not in nostalgia, but in urgency. To build modern systems that echo ancient patterns, not in mimicry, but in respect. Because maybe the best technology isn't always new. Maybe the smartest future is one that remembers. And what do we remember? That a tipi needs no blueprint to breathe. That moss and charcoal clean better than chemicals. That water can be found in fog, flavor, frost, and fruit. That survival is not just physical, it is cultural. We remember that Native American water wisdom was never about fear. It was about balance. And balance now is what we need most. So let this be more than a documentary. Let it be a mirror that shows us what's missing, not in the landscape, but in ourselves. And if you're asking, what can I do? Start here, watch the rain, thank your tap, learn a plant's name, share a story about water with someone younger than you, because that's how memory begins. And when enough memories rise, a culture returns, one where water is sacred, where knowledge is shared, where survival is not an act of desperation, but a dance of relationship. So today, as the world warms, as rivers run thinner and glaciers retreat, let's not just fight for water, let's learn from it. And in doing so, let's honor the legacy of those who listened first.